I don't know very much about Ecuador at all.
Ecuador is majorly a very Catholic country, which makes it a very conservative country. You just get married and the custom is your husband will provide and you'll stay home and raise the children. I feel like it doesn't have its own space. It's just kind of hogged by Colombia and Peru. I remember someone telling me the story in Ecuador that someone had asked them if they lived in a tree house. I understand when people don't know what Ecuador is and they would assume that it's
Hey everyone, welcome to the Orbital Media Podcast, where we learn about human perspective, culture, and story, one interview at a time. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. It really helps us make content, and so we can keep getting more interviews and giving you more interesting insights into the people of planet Earth. So today, in this episode, we're going to be talking about Ecuador, the country in South America, what it's like growing up there, living there, what the culture's like, etc., etc. And today, I'm joined by Stephanie Moreno. Stephanie, would you like to tell everyone out there a little bit about yourself?
I grew up in Ecuador and my whole family is from Ecuador and I'm basically Ecuadorian. I work in the entertainment industry and when I had to choose a career, I decided to move back because the industry there is not too big.
This is going to be a very broad question for you generally, but partly because I don't know very much about Ecuador at all. I know it's in South America, it's a fairly small country in the scheme of countries in South America, yes. It's Spanish speaking, and it's on the equator. That's about it. So if you were meeting someone, could even include me, and you said, oh, I'm from Ecuador, and someone says, oh, tell me about that. What does that mean? What would you kind of open with?
I would always just start with Ecuador is a tiny, tiny country. It's, I think, one of the smallest countries in South America, and I think it's fun. I'm usually surprised when I say I'm from Ecuador and people know where it is or what it is. Mm-hmm. They usually think it's in Africa sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. One time someone asked me if it was, they were like, is it nearby Spain or is it the capital of Spain? And I was like, no, on the other side of the ocean.
That's Madrid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to answer this question because to me, growing up there, I grew up a little, and I'm going to touch on this a lot because I think it's important to understand Ecuador. I grew up upper middle class, and on that side of the social interactions, I guess, it's very Americanized. And even the city and the places you frequent and the vacations you have are very Americanized. So when I moved here, there was not much of a cultural shock on that sense. However, there's another thing I always part with. I feel like this is not something that every Ecuadorian would tell you, but to me it's one of the most important parts of Ecuador. I think it's 95% of the population, it's lives in extreme poverty. It's very, very clearly divided between middle class, upper middle class, and then higher class, and then poverty.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the biggest things that you can compare it with the United States, where most of the country is the middle class. And at least compared to Ecuador, that's my perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Compared to a lot of other Latin American countries, yes, most people are in the middle class. It is, you could argue, getting smaller every day. Right. But that's another conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. So in those terms, Ecuador is very different because when you grow up upper middle class, you grow up in a bubble. So there's a lot of the country or the interactions or the social issues that you would encounter in 95% of the country that I've not experienced. Okay. Again, when I compare it, when people ask me, how's Ecuador, or do you guys live differently? I'm like, no, we live pretty similarly. Another really interesting part about Ecuador that I think it's important to highlight, Ecuador is amazing in terms of nature. I think one of the reasons I love California is that we have environments, you have the desert, you have the forest, you have the beach, and Ecuador is similar in that way. But it's very divided. Again, it's a very small country, and you have the coast, where is the beach, and it's a very tropical. And then you have the Galapagos Island, which is a whole other
which are part of Ecuador.
Which are a part of Ecuador. So I feel like when people tell me, oh, should I visit Ecuador as a tourist? I usually say no, because I'm from the main city, and
which is Quito, right?
No, I'm from, yeah, the capital is Quito.
It's Quito, okay.
Like the biggest city in Ecuador is Guayaquil, which is
don't know
where
what
I'm
that
from.
is. Okay.
Yeah, that's on the coast. There are three main cities, Quito, Cuenca, and Guayaquil.
Okay.
Cuenca is very historic, very small town, but beautiful. Quito is the capital, the most, like if you were looking like for business or more urban, Quito. And then Guayaquil, it's kind of like very metropolitan city. But to me, now that I've lived in like bigger metropolis, I'm like, there's no point on going there. However, sometimes I miss the fact that Ecuador has a lot to offer in terms of nature. So if you go backpacking, you want to go hiking, you want to go camping, you want to like go on adventures, I feel like Ecuador is an amazing place to do that.
The general population of people, like, are you kind of familiar with like the demographics of the country, like the kind of people that live in Ecuador? You mentioned socioeconomics. Most people are very poor. You have a small middle class and upper class. Anything else though about like the people who live there?
I used to say like we're very diverse, but at the same time we're all the same. Because there's not of like an argument of the races, because we're all mixed. And I remember this is a funny story. My mom used to all the time, like when they did the census, is that how you say it in English? She would mark herself as white, and I was like, we're not white.
Right.
And she was like, no, I'm white. I don't know about you, but I'm white. And I just think it's a funny anecdote, because like nobody in Ecuador is white. Even like the white people, like that look white, like mixed.
My impression is it's like so many parts of Latin America. You have a lot of people who are partly indigenous, and you got a lot of people from Southern Europe. You also, I think I heard this, you got a couple people also from like the Middle East, like Lebanon. There's a lady, I don't really know her well, but she was, I think family was like Lebanese, but they were from Ecuador.
Oh yeah, there's a, that's
often not talked about actually. People from the parts of like the Middle East or Mediterranean that live in Latin America that don't often come up in conversation.
And I think that's first I want to say yes, I did not mention when I said like people have like roots somewhere else. I did not mention that there's also like a huge population of like indigenous people that are original from Ecuador. And obviously they're like we're all mixed with like indigenous people and people from abroad. But yes, there's a lot of people, which I think it's cool that you mention right now, because when I tell you we're all the same, I have a bunch of friends that are like or Chinese or come from the Middle East, and to me they're Ecuadorian. They're just mixed, like me. I never identify them as like from somewhere else, and versus here, I guess I don't know if we're making a comparison, but versus here, where like if you're first gen like Polish or first gen Middle Eastern from somewhere, you usually say that you're like I'm Polish, but I was born here, but I'm Polish.
The countries that they've gone in very different directions in some ways, and how people see themselves, and it's a comment that other people I've talked to from outside the U.S. notice, where they say the Americans seem very like obsessed with their single identities and what like group they're in, and how my group's this group that's not the same as this other one, even though there's sort of like we'll say you're American, but there are all these little groups below that. That it does seem less so in large parts of Latin America. There's a lot less of that. It's more just we're from this country and we're kind of
That's really interesting. So I took a class I was very into this subject when I was in college a long time ago, and I took a class that was philosophy of race, and they talked about this, how because of racism issues, and because of how broad the United States is and how much diversity there is here, there is a need, like socially, to find people that are similar to you and to or like have similar, because for example, like Polish people are white, but they have very different culture than the American, the white American, and the Irish are white, but they have a very different culture than both. So finding, I guess, identifying as the culture you come from and finding people that are similar to you, like give you that sense of belonging that otherwise you wouldn't have with like so much diversity and like people like different from you. So like that need to be understood.
And also the population's very high, and because of the way it was created and the different groups of people that sort of showed up, there is sort of a tribalism that kind of develops, and it's come and gone. Like there are periods in time where you could argue even 100 years ago, even amongst what would be called, quote, white Americans now, there was a lot more like European tribalism, like I'm Polish, I'm Greek, I'm French, I'm Irish, whatever. And that sort of got subsumed over this idea of like, no, you're just a white American. And that happened in sort of the 20th century. It was like this generation process that took place.
Right. Which I think, versus Ecuador, like since it's a smaller country and I guess in South America in general, I'm not saying there's no need to find that community or understanding. It's just maybe there's less people that bring that community, so there's like less need to try to identify, just kind of blend
what group you're in. Yeah, and I guess to that about switching into maybe culture a little bit on Ecuador, sort of, so Spanish obviously, national language, ex-Spanish colony, which then became independent. There was the whole thing with Gran Colombia, where you were like part of Colombia and Venezuela, but then that sort of broke up, and then you've been an independent country for a long time. And I get you said that your upbringing was much more Americanized than a lot of people who live there, but like the daily culture, so the food, the family dynamics, sort of how you see like the way the people around me would behave and act, like what was a little bit of that like?
Definitely there's a difference there. It might be, no, this is a general thing, but it might also be like specifically my family or like my surroundings. But it is, Ecuador is majorly a very Catholic country, which makes it a very conservative country. Coming here, I know there's obviously like at least 50% of the country very conservative. There's much more like freedom and like to be who you are here, and it's easier to find that acceptance on no matter like your choices in all aspects of life than there is in Ecuador. In Ecuador, there are definitely like family expectations on like how you should behave, like what you should do, and as a woman, at least for me, it's not that someone tried to force me to like, or told me you have to go get married. That was kind of the expectation, just like you're not gonna go study abroad on your own. I was expected to get my bachelor's degree and then get married and not use it. And I think that's something that does happen a lot in Ecuador. Even women who are educated, they just get the degree to, have that backup and be like, I'm an independent, empowered woman, and like I have my own, like I can build my own future if I want to, but then you just get married and the custom is your husband will like provide and you'll stay home and raise the children, which I found a little problematic just because, yes, you have your bachelor's, but then the 20 years that you stayed home and raised your kids, like it's 20 years that you lost from like building your career, which is fine if that's your choice, but it is very family oriented, which can be great. It's great. And I love my family. We're very close, like, even with my cousins, like even with like extended family. That's a huge thing in Ecuador, and I think in most of South America. But it also, and I don't know if you've watched like, I don't know, Disney or Pixar movies recently, where
I will say less so. Less and less am I watching Disney and Pixar movies, but that's again a different topic to get on.
But there's this one topic that they touch on a lot about other cultures, like some Asian cultures and some Latin cultures, where the pressure to be close to your family or to like live up to their expectations and to not provide for your family, but to kind of be there for support always for your family, ends up being a little overwhelming in time. So I think that is very true, and I think there is also like that beautiful aspect of being able to always rely on your family, but there's also this other part that I feel like sometimes is not talked about enough.
And also the point about the education, that sounds, this is obviously before my time, I wasn't alive at this time, but it sounds very much like the US in sort of the 1950s and 60s, where you had plenty of women who were going to college, but the sense was after you go to college, now you then just kind of raise kids and you get married, and like you're educated, but you're not building a career for yourself.
Right.
And that seemed to have been about, like I think by the 70s that was changing, but like 60s that was still very much kind of what was done.
And this is something that does get talked about a lot here, but about like being kinder to working moms. But in Ecuador, if you're a working mom, I think it's way harder even for you, because of the way we're raised, to work and raise your child, because you feel like you're being a bad mother, because being a good mother in Ecuador means like being there 24/7. And if even like socially, like your friends or like acquaintances or everyone that surrounds you maybe won't tell you to your face like, oh, you're being a bad mother, but they'll be like, oh, she works all day, and like, so it's there's a lot of social pressure in terms of that. And I think that comes with it being like very, very conservative, because it like raises expectations, which is something.
I was talking to someone, this is actually from Chile, who is saying that amongst the younger population, though, there's starting to be a little bit less focus on being super Catholic. Is that, again, given where you were sitting, and I get that's not most of the population, though, did you have a little bit of that sense that like the people who were under 35, let's say, under 30, were less into Catholicism? Or is it like, no, it was pretty much through all the population?
No, most people grow up to be very Catholic still. And I think, I know, because you were saying, and I think, because you told me to kind of like compare with other countries. And I know you said this about Chile, and this is a conversation that I've had with some like Chilean people, how Chile is actually a lot more advanced in terms of that socially, to not to be more accepting in terms of like what your choices are in terms of like religion or and Ecuador is very, very different. It's still very conservative.
Okay. That makes sense then, that even for younger populations it's like, nope, through and through people are Catholic there. The other thing too, and this is I guess sort of friendship, the family dynamic's so key, and it seems when I talk to people from very family-centric cultures that friendships often overlap with things like your cousins, and you like half the time those are like who you're friends with. And the idea of having, I'm generalizing here, but like having friends outside of your family, like you'll have them, but they're not as common as somewhere like the US, where your friends are not your family, generally speaking. Also because families often are smaller. Or was your experience like, no, my friends are just, they're not in my family. Like friends are just regular people who I'm not related to.
So there is that sense of, I'm going to compare it with the idea that I have from the US, where a lot of people move away from like their parents and like their family, and they build like their chosen family, which is usually the friends. In Ecuador, that's most of the time, and I don't want to generalize, but like that's not the norm per se. You like your family is family to that, and that's where it like that compromise and loyalty to your family come, like no matter what they do, like they're your family. But I do think that you also have, we do build very, very strong bonds with our friends. And I think, especially, and again, I'm going to compare it with California right now, because that's what I'm like going through. And a lot of people that I talk with here mention how it's hard to build connection with friends here, versus in Ecuador it's a little bit easier. And I also think it's because most people in Ecuador don't leave, and there's very little people coming into the city, where like you've known these people forever, and even if you don't know them specifically, you've known the families, or you know someone who knows this person, so it's easier to know who and how to trust people. So I think it kind of comes from there, but we do build friendships. Like my best friends are still my friends from high school, and sometimes I do go to them for like issues or stuff, like more than I would go to my family, even though like, yeah, my family like will be there no matter what, and like they support me, but we do build like very strong bonds with our friends.
With your friends, yeah. What, I guess, broad question, right? But like, what was it like growing up upper middle class in one of these environments where there's a tremendous disparity between people with money and people without money? Like, what was your daily life like? Was there a sense of things like private security, a sense of like, oh, you don't go over there, a sense of like, this is our world? Or was it like, no, I was free to roam and travel? What was kind of going on there? So,
well, I mean, private security, definitely no. I wasn't like rich or anything. But there was, my mom was very overprotective, yes, but there is that like, you don't go downtown, and if you go, like go with a man. You don't go to the south. That's like, and I remember I worked for 2 years in a TV station in Ecuador, and it was in the south, and like my family at first was like super worried and like, don't leave the station and just stay there, because it's dangerous.
This is the south of the country.
The south of the city.
Or the south of the city. Okay, south of the city.
This is my experience, and I think there are a lot of people who grow up the same way, maybe never like realize it. I think I had like a strong like bump into reality at one point, and it opened up my wow. But I did not grow up like conscious about the realities of the country and other people. I definitely grew up in a bubble where my reality was like, I was the valid human in a way. Like that sounds very strong, but my mom and I shouldn't say this on camera, but I'm just gonna say it for the sake of this. My mom sometimes would tell me when I would ask a question about, we had people working like housekeepers, and when I would ask a question about them, or like, oh, why are they staying, like they're working on the weekend, you know, she would be like, oh, because like that's their lives, like they're different, you know, they're not like us, like they don't need a weekend, kind of like, not like that, but kind of. So in my 10-year-old brain, that's what I would hear, and that's how you grow up thinking those are different people, you know, like those people don't have like rights, don't have emotions, don't have like don't have the same needs as us, you know, like they don't have the need to a restful weekend. There comes a point, obviously, like you grow up and you realize like they're also people, and what I see a lot is people like trying to do charity work and being like condescending. Not condescending. Yeah, no, I mean, in plenty of cases, I mean, I'm thinking about the US too. I mean, absolutely condescending, for sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah. But they help with this like pity type of like, oh, like, here, the dollar. Yeah. And like, that's not gonna solve anything, but like, it makes you feel like, oh, I'm superior. Yeah. And I don't know, it's, I do think there's that huge separation, again, in my experience, where if you don't get to the point where like life kind of hits you in the face with a break to like open your perspective to other realities, you don't realize that you are living in a country that has this extreme separation of. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough, right? Especially when you're a kid, because kids are kids and you just understand the reality that you're given. And it's hard to sometimes understand like a broader sense of truth. So your perspective on this changed. Do you find that your parents' perspective ever changed, or they still very much view it as like, no, that's the help, those are the people that clean our house, like?
Yeah, I don't even try anymore in terms of that. They're not bad people, and I just want to like highlight that. They're if anything very like given and like always trying to help and trying to like be generous. But I feel like there comes a point where it was so hard for me, I guess at like 18, 19, when I realized when you start meeting people and like fraternizing with people that are not within your bubble or your circle, I think that's when you start realizing like this person, like it doesn't come from my circle, but like has the same values, have like the same emotions, like it's hurt, like those things that I don't think they've ever experienced. So they've never changed it, and I'm speaking from like all the adults that were ever in my life. I don't think they've ever changed that perspective. But also I think they've not had the opportunity to do so in a way. I think the way your social life works in Ecuador is so structured that it's hard to break out of that shell that you have.
When you say it's structured, what do you mean by that?
I guess I would go back to the expectations that we were talking about earlier. Like you have, you have like this, like, when I was younger, and I think that's the best way to explain it, I would go to a friend's house and my mom would ask me like what's like their last name, what's their second last name, because in Ecuador we use both last names. And then she would ask me, and what's her mom's last name, and who's her mom's mom, and what's his dad's two last names, and like so. It's like a thing of like you can only kind of socialize with people that are within that are like acceptable.
Yeah. It sounds very sort of, I don't want to say this went much later than the Middle Ages, but it sounds very like 19th century European kind of nobility families of like they're the whatever family and the whatever family, and like, oh, they're related to so and so they're fine, you can like they're at our level, like we can. I mean, definitely not as strict or noble, but yes, but that same idea of like, oh, they're this family, like that's a fine family, this one no, not
exactly. So like it's kind of not purposely, but it's just the way it works, where the head of the family like kind of controls. There's always like that one like senior person in the household like controlling that, like who, like what events you go to, like what like who you socialize with, and like what school do you go to, and in a lot of cases, like what career do you follow? Like, are you gonna take your like parents' business from them? And then like you have to get married and have children. So I feel like it's very structured in that way. Like you already know what the next step is. And like obviously you have like those like that stage in your life, like at 17, 18, like what am I gonna do with my life? But everyone, no matter what the path is, eventually if you stay within that structure, it's just gonna like be molded back to get married, have children, like stay within like acceptable families, and just that's the life you live. Raise your kids, like provide, like if you're a man, provide to your family, and have like your weekends, the way they look, like it's the same for everyone. Like you do something in the afternoon with your children, then you hang out with the same people you've hung out like your whole life, like your friends or your cousins or your family, and that's what you do, and that's life. So it's, again, if you are not forced to kind of break out of that structure, you don't get the chance to know other realities. And actually, to switch to, you talked about business and what people are doing at this
the upper part of the society, what people are doing for work. You mentioned though that like entertainment, TV, that's a very, very, very small industry.
Yes.
What are sort of, and again, this is what you were seeing in the adults you got a sense of, like what were the jobs, like the high paying jobs, the fields of industry that people often were pursuing? Were there certain themes that you saw? Was it a lot of people work in finance, or like there's a lot of stuff with resources, like, oh, there's like a mine or timber or something, and like everyone makes their money because they run the big company that like, mines the whatever, like.
Yeah, people with haciendas.
They're estates. Yeah, it's like a big estate.
Yeah.
A big estate.
They usually grow like bananas.
Yeah,
That's like petroleum.
Okay.
No, it's oil.
Oil, yeah. No, that's
petroleum.
too.
In mines.
Mines, okay.
Mines.
Okay.
That's I think that's seafood.
Yeah.
So I think those, I don't say mainly, but that's a huge part of how people make their money in Ecuador.
So you would own a company, you'd own like a seafood company, or you'd own like a mine, or you'd be a higher level person running a mine, that sort of thing.
Definitely like the person that owns it, not the person that's like.
Oh, of course, yeah, no, of course. So yeah, you would, for the people making the money, it's like there's probably a little bit of finance, but it's mostly. You've got to have a little bit of finance to like move the money around to get things done. But a lot of people who had wealth and who were, upper middle class, they'd be in these management or owner positions of these resource gathering industries, basically.
And just like to make it clear, because I don't want to like people think that we only do like researchers from Ecuador. There are like the normal jobs, like the lawyers, like
someone who's like a doctor,
can make doctors, like can make good money, like all of the, like if you are a banker, that's a thing too. Like the people who own the TV stations, even though it's not a big industry, like they have their money. So you have the is it multinational companies? Like that's how you call them in English?
Multinationals,
Yep. We have those too. So people who work at those companies like have like make good money as well. So there's a bunch, but if we go like to mainly what's like where does Ecuador make their money? Like it's there,
That's more. Yeah, I think that's similar to if you were in parts of the U.S., like if you were in the Great Plains, or if you were in not all of Texas, but like parts of Texas, that you'd have the same thing. Like there's a ton of money from like oil or from farming or from mining, but in large other parts of the U.S., like you would basically never run into someone who would do that for a living. It'd be like they work in entertainment or whatever, or like they're all lawyers, that sort of a thing. And so I think like where I grew up, for example, it was like basically it's finance and law. Like everyone around you, all the families, they work in finance and they work in law. And that's maybe not entirely it, but that's mostly what all the adults around you seems like that's what they're doing. There's not a sense of like, oh, so-and-so owns a mine, or so-and-so, owns like a timber company and they're, whatever. So do you want to talk about food and drink?
Sure. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's my favorite part about Ecuador.
Nice. It seems to be like a lot of people's favorite thing to do is like, let's talk about our culture's food and drink.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite part. I think it's one of the most important parts of Ecuador. The main reason I go back. No, I'm just kidding. But
food tourism's real, though. I mean, it is real.
I always tell this to when I just had a coworker tell me she's going to Ecuador soon, and I was like, definitely main thing, do a food tour because. It's great. I actually baked, and I was gonna bring you alfajores. Do you know that? But I forgot. Sorry.
Okay. Those are like the little they're desserts, right? They're little cookie kind of.
Yeah. Filled with dulce de leche, manjar we call it, but here it's dulce de leche. That's like one of my favorite desserts, and they're great. We do a lot with plantain. Which I know it's not big here, like you find it in the supermarkets, but it's not big. But we have sweet plantain and like regular plantain, and you make a lot of things with that. But my favorite, it's called bolon. It's just a bowl of plantain with cheese and kind of like pork. Seafood, again, it's huge. We have ceviche.
I was gonna say, I was guessing that you guys are like Peru and Mexico, where you're in the ceviche club.
Oh yes.
Like you've got a stake there. Yeah.
Yeah. Ceviche in Ecuador is great too. Fish is great. That's one of my favorite dishes in Ecuador. Like you eat rice with fish and fried plantain, and then a little like salad with onion and tomatoes and avocado, and it's great.
It sounds a little bit more like Peruvian, sort of in that space where it's not like some of the food from Colombia. I remember it's so heavy. It's just like it's a ton of like rice and like fried pork and like just heavy beans and stuff. This sounds a little bit more, yeah, like it's a little bit lighter. Like you still have plantains and rice and things, but it's
no, it's very heavy.
It is very heavy.
So yeah, I guess I mentioned like the lighter plates.
Okay.
Not because they're lighter, but because they're your like typical food, but you don't eat that on your day to day. We do eat like your lunch would look like beans with rice or beans, or chicken stew. That's very popular as well. Beef stew, lentils.
Yeah.
Lentils with rice. We eat rice every single day.
Okay.
I don't do that anymore, but in Ecuador, like every plate that they give you, it'll have rice on it, and
it's less so potatoes then? Like you have them, but they're okay.
Yeah, we have them. We eat them a lot in all of its forms and shapes, but mainly it's plantains and rice.
It's plantains and rice. Interesting. And same also with bread. Like bread, not so much.
Oh, bread is like the biggest part. I've never ever tried better bread than in Ecuador, but it has to be the little tienda, like
at the little stores. Yeah.
Yeah, like you don't have that. Or like a word for it in English. There are no like tienditas, like bakeries here. It's like a bakery, but like bakeries here are. Yeah, they don't have like much variety.
Yes,
like in Ecuadorian bread, if you ever get a chance to be in Ecuador, go to a bakery in like the most dangerous town that you can find. That would be the best bread.
That's so interesting.
No, I'm joking about the dangerous town, but like it has to be like, don't go to like the main bigger bakeries, but it has to be the smaller bakery, and they have. This is the thing that I miss the most. They always have fresh bread in the morning, 6 a.m. Like you go and buy your bread at 6 a.m. and you have it for breakfast. Here you have they bake the bread daily, but it's not open at 6 a.m. Like bagels for Americans, like that's what like this other type of bread is for us. Like it's your daily, like regular, whatever. I'm gonna get a bagel. Like that's what bread is to us there. Like I'm just gonna get like sweet bread.
So it'd be plantains, bread, and then rice. Rice are the big ones. Yeah, with potatoes being like a little bit less. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean we still eat them, but it's not like
a big thing. Let's get on the topic of what people do for fun. Obviously people are going to do normal human things with like they're going to see their friends and they're going to go out and things. But do you find that there's anything notable, again, at least being in the US, now that you can compare it to something else, see, in Ecuador, it's actually very popular for people to do X, on Friday or Saturday night?
And again, this comes from my experience.
At your socioeconomic level.
Yeah, sometimes I'm afraid to say something.
It's totally at your socioeconomic level.
Create issues. But I think what people do most is just party and like get together with friends. So like on the positive aspect, and I'm probably saying this because I obviously here I don't have my group of friends, but in Ecuador like I would go out like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, sometimes like just get together every week with a group of friends and like drink, and then Saturday would go to a club, and then like Thursday would just go out to eat and have a drink. So I think that's mostly what people do. Versus now that I live here in California, at least like in LA, there's like a huge variety of things that you can do. I feel like I find myself doing so much more here than I used to do there. But that community aspect of like having your group of friends that you see like all the time. I guess that's nicer there, and versus here. But here you have way much more things to do.
You mentioned though the nature and that idea of like the you've got jungle. I mean, but you've got the mountains. You've got sort of a tropical coastal kind of area. Do people do a lot of, you know, when you were growing up, would people do trips like, oh, we're going to go up into the mountains this weekend, or like, do people ever go to the Amazon? They're like, we're going to go into the jungle and like run around for a week, like. Or is that was just like, no, we're just gonna hang out and party in the city and drink and like go to dinner?
So I think funny enough, I did have I knew a group of people who are not a friend of mine. It was like his group of friends. They used to go camping a lot, but normally, no, people don't do that as much as they could, and I think also has to do with like how expensive it can get versus the minimum wage in Ecuador. But there's people don't do that as much. There's a lot to do, but it's not your typical weekend. It's something that you plan for. Like
your sense was there's less of that sort of trip outside the city culture, camping culture.
The one thing that at least in Guayaquil, just because we're really close to the coast, that people do a lot in the summer, everyone like drives to the beach on the weekends. So like every weekend, everyone will just drive to the beach and stay there for the weekend, because it's like a 2-hour drive. And I don't want to say most people, but at least like most people within my circle, like they have like their like apartments or beach house, so everyone would go stay there, and this is only throughout the summer. But then at the beach, like you'll do the same that's in the city.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I think that's true. I mean that would be true here. Like you know, that's above my pay grade, but plenty of people do that in any beach part of the world. Exactly. I think that's pretty common. But it was more that aspect of like, you know, there are some parts of the world, some cultures where like people are very into like every weekend you go hike in the mountains, or you go you do these things out in the nature, you know, out in the natural world. You mentioned this idea of an Americanized upbringing where things seem just like very, very American to you. I guess was that just like the media that you were watching, or was it other stuff beyond just like what was on TV and like the movies that you were seeing?
So when I say Americanized, I guess because you know, when you say I'm from Ecuador, and I think it has changed a lot like now versus 10-15 years ago, but it's this idea of like we dress different, we eat different, I don't know, that our I remember someone telling me this story, like in Ecuador, that someone had asked them if they lived in a tree house or something like that.
Wait, was this they were in the U.S.?
They were in the U.S. and someone, like they said, I'm Ecuadorian, and someone asked them like, oh, how is it? Like, is it true that you live on like the trees, like on a tree house? Yeah, but this was a long time ago.
That person must have been kind of crazy. Like, wow.
I think it was before the internet, maybe. I don't know.
But geez, I mean.
But so like I guess I mean it that like in terms of that, you know, there's still, and I heard this not long ago. It was a few years ago, but not long ago. It was an African girl like just explaining that Africa is not all poverty, and that there are cities, and it's like they grow up Americanized, like with the media, and they like dress with jeans and a t-shirt, and like so I guess that's what I mean. Like it's just the same. Like aside from like the culture. We just grow up, like, you know, like you go to school 9 through 6, no, not through 6, like 7 through 3 p.m. You get
7. That's early.
Like you do your sports, you make your friends, like you go to the mall, it's like the same type of.
It's the sort of it's the like the globalized, vaguely Western culture.
Yes.
idea. Yes.
I like that. I like the word globalized better than like American.
Western culture. Yeah. Okay. Because when you were saying Americanized, I was wondering if it was like, we're actually like everyone loves drinking Coca-Cola, and we're specifically watching like American sports, and like we all go to English language international schools, and it was like these specific things where I'm like, oh, when I came to the US, it was like, oh, not a big deal.
But there is like the food, for example. Well, not as much, but now we have a lot of like fast food,
like that sort of stuff.
So so we do have that's what I mean. Like when I come here, like I'm not like, wow, McDonald's. Like it's not like that. And I like we drink so much like American soda, like Coca-Cola. Like the stores, like clothing stores, like that's what I mean. Like it's not. There's not too much of a culture change. We don't have like Americanized schools, but I know there are Americanized schools actually. Like there's one that opened a few years ago, because I know a lot of like people I know have their children there now, and it's like the school's full in English, even though that's not our main language. But it's kind of like that idea that you need to learn English, and they are very Americanized in terms of that. So like they can like go study abroad and not have like issues like in college and stuff, or like like open up that opportunity.
That makes I kind of I get what you're saying.
And sorry, even like I went to like after, obviously like in high school we had English as a subject, English language as a subject throughout, like since kindergarten. But then I went to a community college that was like made in English and what do you like like credited by the I don't remember what you call it.
Accredited.
Accredited, accredited. So it was an American college in Ecuador that I went to. So I guess that's what I mean. Like you have a lot of these things where like you get here, it's the same. I see what you're saying. I mean that's interesting. I would have figured, certainly for things like clothing and stuff, like I figured that. Sure, if we were talking about things, I mean maybe. I mean, there are regions of the world, there are certain cultures where like, and there's a whole thing about like certain cultures that have really pushed back on that for better or worse. I mean, sometimes those cultures are also not the greatest places to live, but like I don't, I mean, I think Latin America is as like, you have maybe really rural isolated areas where people are still wearing quote, like, I think like the Andes, like traditional clothing. Yeah.
I don't think of anywhere in Latin America where people wouldn't be wearing just general kind of, jeans and t-shirts. You're right. But believe it or not, believe it or not, like that's especially Ecuador being really like shocking. So. Like because even like if you like look geographically, like Ecuador, it's not even. I feel like it doesn't have like its own space. It's just kind of hogged by Colombia and Peru, and it's like in the like it's like their sun in the middle. So like I understand when people don't know what Ecuador is, and they would assume that it's maybe like a very underdeveloped country, and that's why you don't hear about it. You don't hear about it.
Like you don't hear like unfortunately, like you don't hear like musicians, you don't hear like about like you would barely like have heard about one Ecuadorian film, and if you
exactly. I mean, I think you're like the first person from Ecuador I've ever met.
Right. Like I don't know people from Ecuador abroad. I haven't, like very few people. So it's
Whereas I mean, I think the U.S. it's interesting because when people think of like Latino people, they're really thinking mostly from Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. And I've even noticed even South America as a whole. It's maybe changing a little bit with Brazilians. Like it does seem, especially in LA, there are more people now from Brazil. But by and large, it's not common to meet people from South America in the U.S. I've at least found it. Even out of that, Ecuador is like almost no one. So you're like the first person I met from Ecuador. I'm curious, actually, at least again, your sense of living there and growing up, and just how people would talk about things like. If you had a sense of the relationship between Ecuador and other neighboring countries, like there was a sense about, Peru or Colombia or Brazil, and like, we don't like people from here, or like, oh, we've always liked this country, or like, we got a sports rivalry with this place, or like, oh, everyone goes to vacation, in this place. Like, what were some of those kind of dynamics like?
So there's this, and I don't think anyone takes it seriously, really, but there's this like beef with Peru about like and it's funny because I know in Peru they teach you history differently than like this part of history they teach it differently in Peru than in Ecuador, and for us is they stole part of our land and then for them it's we tried to steal it from them or something like that. So it's so there's that like, oh, you stole my land, but it's not. Nobody like if I meet a Peruvian, I would never.
Yeah, nobody on a daily basis cares about it, you know.
And then I just remember about this, and I think it's funny because I think it applies for most of South America, but in Ecuador as well. Nobody likes Argentinians, and like again, it's not personal. Like if I meet an Argentinian, I'd be like, but it's that the Argentinian stereotype of them being like cocky and. Yeah. So there's that.
Was there a sense of like vacationing in other countries in South America? Or like if you were traveling abroad and it's like, oh, we're going to go here for our special vacation, were there like very popular places? And
I didn't travel a lot as a child, but I think the most popular place to visit, even like family vacations, it's Miami or Orlando for Ecuadorians. You know, like if you really want to meet Ecuadorian people, like go to Miami.
Go to Miami. Yep.
Yeah, go to Miami, and then Orlando because of Disney World.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've only been to Miami once, but even when I was there, it really kind of struck me just how many. Just like how many Latino people, but it seemed like from lots of different parts of Latin America, which was very. I kind of didn't know what to expect when I went there, but it was really interesting to see like you had like Brazilian people, Argentinian people from Peru, and less so Mexico actually, you know, because I think in the U.S. there's this byword of like, oh, Latino just means like you're from Mexico, or like maybe, you know, like Guatemala or something. But Miami, I found it was totally not the case. It was this whole other part of Latin America that I think like a lot of South America and obviously tons of people from Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba, Puerto Rico. I think a bunch of people from Venezuela are in Miami as well. Ecuador, probably Colombia. I'm
curious, I guess, I know you said that when you came to the US, there wasn't sort of a whole lot of culture shock in a way. Should we say you're like, I kind of just show up and like, I kind of feel like it's not, I don't feel like I'm this foreigner and like, what am I, doing here? But.
So I don't know. So it's funny because I feel like when I first moved for college, this was almost 9 years ago, I never felt like a foreigner. Even though, and I remember obviously like you're younger and I was like very oblivious, and I was shocked once when they told me like oh yeah, I know you're not from here because like your accent, and I was like I thought I blended in. And I don't know, I never, like, back then I never felt like an outsider, but I feel like now, and I remember having like a bunch of like American friends or like people from other places, not necessarily international students, but like there's diversity here. And I just felt like I blended in. But now, I guess, like I'm almost like at my 30s and living here in California and like kind of like wanting to settle here. I do feel like there's not like I feel like an outsider, but there are. I guess like it's coming into like work where you need a whole. If I was home, I just get a job and I know what's going on, it's just a matter of like your skills. Here, there's a bunch of things that become harder, and like you start realizing as you work, like things that people would just understand out of like context. Like you need to like be more like, what is that? You have to ask the question because you have no idea what's going on. Maybe like knowing the geography, like sometimes, which we do learn in high school, like about like the U.S. geography, but there are like how do like highways work? Like it's like minor stuff like that. That when you are at work and those things become relevant, you start feeling like, okay, like here's my, I want to say like disadvantage, or like here's how I differ to like the Americans, and you start like feeling a little different in terms of that. Like I'm used to that now. I'm not afraid to ask questions, and like it's fine. But I think that's when I started like feeling a little bit like an outsider.
I've never really kind of thought about that. You know, people always bring up these like the big cultural things, like, oh, people do like this on the weekend, or they were asked a bit, like the little daily stuff, like the referencing of like a place, or like I'm going to so and so for the weekend, and everyone knows if you say, oh, I'm going here for the weekend, what that means, or like, oh, it means like they have money, or like they don't have money, or they're like, and you know, like, oh, they're driving on this highway to go so and so, or they were in this state, like, oh, what does that mean? Like,
so it's like really like minor stuff that you don't know until like it comes up, and I'm it sucks I don't have a better example, but yeah, it's just little things that are like cultural things that you would know growing up. And when I ask, some people are like, yeah, you've never done that, and I'm like, I don't know.
Do you find in Los Angeles also that because you're from Latin America, but you're not from a country where there's really like an Ecuadorian community, do you find you're associating often with people from other Latino cultures, or do you find I just view myself as like a person from Ecuador and there are just the people in Los Angeles and I kind of just interact with whoever?
I'm not selective in terms of that, because again, like back in college I had a lot of American friends, and you come to realize it's not about like their nationality or anything, but like, like finding people with like similar values and stuff. But there is, again, now after like a bunch of years of living abroad, you like finding people that speak Spanish and that have like similar like cultural things, like minor things that you just connect with. It is sometimes easier to like connect with a Latin person with an American, or like someone from somewhere else. Because even it's like, I guess, you like bond over that experience of like living abroad. So it's like,
When you think about like how are you connecting with other people, like what are the things that interest you?
I think to me, and it's gonna sound really like cheesy, but to me like kindness and humbleness are important, which like sometimes like in Latin cultures you might not find that. So it's like you might not in Latin cultures, but you might find like Latin people that are like, I don't know, like selfish or like mean. Yeah, so to me it's or like in the structure that I grew up in, like some people like, because they believe to be a little superior to other people, like like treat the waiter like bad. So those things are important to me, and I think that's what I look for in people. Like I always say, like I try not to, like listen and watch first people, how they behave with other people, like how they express themselves about other people, and like I feel like that's important to me, like when you're like what you have to say about others. And like
that's actually, to back up a little bit, that's an interesting point about sort of like the way that people would act in the culture that you're around versus in like these are big generalizations, but like different cultures or different people groups, they have different sort of ways of behaving in a way, like, and I guess comparing a large city with lots of different people back to Ecuador now, do you have a better sense in hindsight of like how the people, at least at your social level in Ecuador, like would behave? Like what were common sort of, you mentioned being like arrogant versus kind versus humble versus nice, like traits that were valued versus traits that were not valued?
I think status, unfortunately, is very valued. And then, yes, kindness, but to me, and it's something I sometimes don't like. It's like this screen of like, look at me being like doing charity. So like that's what kindness is in Ecuador. Like that's why you're so generous. And to me, that's not it. And because like those same people might go and like yell at like their housekeeper or something. So that's to me, like how you treat people and how you like give them value as human beings. It's it's what matters, and it might have to do with the way I grew up and like how I was when I was younger, and then like what I've learned and how I've changed. So it might have to do with that. And I don't know if this, because as you were talking, I thought of this example, and I don't know if this, but like something that how people are in Ecuador and in South America versus how people can be in like other countries or other communities, other cultures. Because this is an example of my friend who lives in Barcelona, and she was giving me this. She was venting about this.
And she was Ecuadorian, living in Barcelona. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and she was like, I'm not even like hurt. I'm just like, I don't understand, because and I completely understood what she said for me living here versus like when I was in Ecuador, and it was something about someone giving her a ride, and this guy was just like, oh yeah, no, we don't have the space anymore, and because her school is in a mountain, so it was just like bringing everyone down to like I think the parking lot or something like that. So he was just like, oh no, yeah, there's just no space. And then he texted her and he was like, oh, maybe there is, like I'll let you know. And then he just left and didn't like confirm or anything. So she was like, what? Like I would never leave and just not tell the other person who's waiting for me. And I get that. And because in Ecuador it would, like, it doesn't matter if you have room in your car. It would be like, we'll figure it out how like we'll just all fit in the car. We'll make it we'll make it work. So it's that like I guess in Ecuador you have that like community like.
Just
if one people fits, like if one people eats, like 10, like how's the saying, like where one people eats, like 3 can eat.
Right.
So it's that like there's always room for everyone, no matter like what you're doing. Versus like maybe like bigger countries where like the culture is more individualized.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh well, no. Gonna do my thing and you can do yours.
Countries where there's more regulations, I think there's a lot more of that, just like, I'm sorry ma'am, the bus fits 15 people, all of the seats are taken, you're gonna have to wait for the next bus.
I know, but I think it's more, because I think that's a big part too. But it's kind of the example that I was given earlier about how family expects you to like be there. It's the same for like it extends to kind of friends, like you don't leave anyone behind. So it's that I guess that's like the positive part of the like, or not necessarily the positive part, but the part that I like and
about
like
the culture,
about the culture is like nobody gets left behind, even if that involves like a fine. You know, like and it's not only about the car. It's like what I was saying, like here, you know, like you're eating and that's it. Like if in Ecuador, if I cook, like it's like I have two like Latin roommates right now, and it's like if I cook, it's like, oh guys, there's food, and like everyone eats. You know, like it's kind of that. Versus like the individualized culture, which again I think there are like a lot of benefits, and I like that part of like being individualized, because like you gotta, you know, like it gives you more freedom and space.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Ecuador. I've learned, I feel like I've learned so much now about the country, and a country I knew almost nothing about before. So thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you all for watching. If you made it this far, you know, please go ahead and like the video if you can, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and we'll see you next time.